establishing it as a key support area.
There's a certain feeling that comes right before something important happens. It's not excitement. It's not panic. It's that quiet tension in the air where nothing looks different on the surface, but you can feel that momentum has already shifted underneath. If you've been holding XLM for a while, you may recognize that feeling right now. Not because of price, not because of headlines, but because the conversation
all out with a joint statement this morning, encouraging banks that host deposits from crypto firms to monitor liquidity and ensure that there are proper risk management practices.
Conversations around Stellar have changed. For a long time, XLM has been misunderstood. People treated it like a smaller version of something else, a cheaper alternative, a backup option. But that framing misses the point entirely. Stellar was never built to compete for attention. It was built to move value where value movement breaks down. And right now, those breakdown points are becoming impossible for global finance to ignore. The news surrounding Stellar isn't loud. It isn't flashy. It doesn't come with countdown timers or viral clips. Instead, it shows up in partnerships that sound boring to the average investor. Infrastructure updates that don't pump price overnight. Quiet mentions in institutional discussions that never trend on social media. But insiders know this is exactly what real adoption looks like. What Stellar is about to hit isn't a number on a chart. It's a threshold, a point where usage stops being experimental and starts becoming embedded. A moment where the network shifts from being interesting to being necessary. And those moments are rare, because they require timing, readiness, and trust to line up all at once. Think about how money actually moves in the real world. Not trading, not speculation, real money, salaries, remittances, cross-border settlements for people and institutions that can't afford delays or volatility. That's the world Stellar lives in. And it's a world that has been quietly expanding while everyone else argued about narratives. Stellar's strength has always been its focus on access. On making sure money can move even when systems don't talk to each other, even when banks don't trust each other, even when infrastructure is outdated or fragmented. That mission used to sound idealistic. Today it sounds practical, because the pressure on global payment systems has reached a breaking point. Costs are rising. Settlement times feel outdated. Liquidity gets trapped. Entire regions remain underbanked or excluded. Governments talk about financial inclusion, but systems struggle to deliver it. Stellar doesn't solve everything, but it solves enough of the problem to matter. What's changing now is that institutions are no longer just experimenting with solutions like Stellar. They're planning around them. When planning replaces testing, everything changes. Planning means timelines. It means budget allocation. It means internal buy-in. It means risk departments signing off instead of pushing back. And that's the part most people miss. Stellar was designed to be boring in the best way possible. Predictable fees, fast settlement, transparent operations. These aren't things that trend on social media, but they are exactly what institutions require. When you hear insiders say Stellar is about to hit something, they're not talking about hype. They're talking about scale. Scale is when a network stops being judged on potential and starts being judged on reliability. It's when uptime matters more than marketing. It's when failure becomes unacceptable. Stellar has spent years preparing for that moment, often at the cost of attention and price action. Another reason this moment feels different is alignment. Regulation, technology, and institutional needs are finally pointing in the same direction. Systems like Stellar that were built with compliance and transparency in mind no longer feel risky. They feel inevitable, and inevitability is a powerful force in finance. There's also a psychological shift happening. Investors are tired of promises. Institutions are tired of pilots that never go anywhere. Everyone wants systems that actually work. Stellar works. Quietly, consistently, without drama. If you've ever wondered why XLM hasn't behaved like other assets during hype cycles, this is why. It was never built to perform for crowds. It was built to perform under pressure. And pressure is increasing across the global financial system. This doesn't mean overnight explosions. It means something more important. It means relevance. It means being in the room when decisions are made. It means becoming part of the plumbing instead of sitting on the sidelines waiting for attention. So when you hear huge XLM news, don't imagine fireworks. Imagine contracts. Imagine integrations. Imagine systems quietly flipping from optional to essential. Those are the moments that reshape valuation long before price reacts. And if you're feeling that quiet tension right now, that sense that something is lining up even though nothing looks different yet, you're not imagining it. That's what it feels like right before a network crosses a threshold. We're going to talk about what that threshold actually is, why it matters more than price targets, and how Stellar positioning itself here could change how the market views XLM entirely. Because once a network becomes necessary, the conversation changes, and it rarely goes back. The threshold Stellar is approaching isn't something you can circle on a price chart. It's a usage threshold, a point where activity on the network stops being driven by curiosity and starts being driven by necessity. That distinction matters because necessity changes behavior. When systems rely on a network to function, they don't care about market sentiment. They care about uptime, cost, and reliability. For years, Stellar operated in an environment where it was constantly underestimated. People looked at its low fees and fast settlement and assumed it lacked ambition. But in global finance, ambition looks very different from speculation. Ambition looks like building something that works under stress, in places where systems fail, and for users who don't get second chances. This Stellar is about to hit is scale with purpose. Not inflated activity. Not wash volume. Real transaction flow tied to remittances, aid distribution, cross-border payments, and financial access. When those flows increase, they don't just disappear in a bear market. They persist. And persistence is what transforms a network from an experiment into infrastructure. Stellar's design choices start to make sense when you view them through this lens. Predictable fees are not exciting, but they allow institutions to plan. Fast settlement isn't flashy, but it reduces risk. Transparent operations don't generate hype, but they build trust. Every decision Stellar made favored long-term reliability over short-term attention. One of the biggest shifts happening right now is institutional perception. Institutions no longer ask whether networks like Stellar are viable. They ask whether they are ready. That's a subtle but critical change. Viability is theoretical. Readiness is operational. Readiness means integration frameworks exist. It means compliance teams have reviewed the system. It means risk models have been built. Insiders say Stellar is crossing from pilot programs into planning stages. That means use cases are being mapped not as experiments, but as components of broader systems. When that happens, network demand stops being optional. It becomes part of business processes. Another factor pushing Stellar toward this threshold is global pressure. Remittance corridors are under strain. Aid distribution needs transparency. Cross-border payments are still too slow and expensive. Governments talk about inclusion, but existing systems struggle to deliver it. Stellar fits into these problems cleanly, without asking institutions to abandon everything they already use. This is why Stellar often shows up in conversations about interoperability. It doesn't try to replace systems, connects them. That makes it less threatening and more useful. When insiders say Stellar is about to hit something, they're often referring to this moment where interoperability stops being a nice feature and becomes a requirement. There's also a behavioral element. Institutions don't move because they want to innovate. They move because not moving becomes riskier than change. That tipping point is approaching fast. As more systems modernize, those that don't begin to look inefficient and exposed. Stellar offers a way forward that feels incremental rather than disruptive. Market participants often underestimate how powerful boring reliability can be. A network that works every time with minimal surprises becomes invisible. And invisibility is success in infrastructure. No one talks about the plumbing when it works. They only notice when it breaks. Stellar's invisibility has been mistaken for irrelevance. In reality, it has been quietly proving itself where it matters most. That proof accumulates slowly, and then all at once it changes perception. This is why price has not reflected this shift yet. Markets react to stories. Infrastructure evolves through spreadsheets, internal memos, and usage metrics that never make headlines. By the time the story changes, the groundwork is already laid. Another important detail is alignment with regulation. Stellar was built with transparency in mind. That matters more now than ever. Networks that fight regulation exhaust institutions. Networks that accommodate it get adopted. Stellar falls firmly in the second category. If you're wondering why insiders sound calm rather than excited, this is why. They've seen this pattern before. Quiet building, slow adoption, then sudden recognition. The recognition always looks abrupt to outsiders, but it never is. So when we say Stellar is about to hit this threshold, we're talking about a moment where the network no longer needs to prove itself. It simply needs to keep working. And when that happens, demand becomes sticky. It stays. Because once those signals appear, the window to understand what's happening narrows fast. And the conversation around XLM begins to change permanently. At this stage, the most important thing isn't speculation. It's observation. Insiders aren't guessing where Stellar is going next. They're watching for confirmation that the network is moving from preparation into execution. And those confirmations don't come as announcements. They come as patterns. One of the first signals insiders watch is consistency. Not spikes. Not sudden bursts of activity. Consistency over time. When transaction volume grows steadily without marketing pushes or hype cycles, it means usage is organic. It means people are relying on the network because it works, not because they expect a price reaction. That kind of growth is slow, but it's durable. Another signal is the nature of who is using the network. When activity shifts from individual experimentation to institutional workflows, the texture of usage changes. Transactions become predictable. Volumes stabilize. Peak usage happens during business hours, not social media cycles. Insiders pay close attention to this because it tells them Stellar is being woven into real processes. There's also the signal of silence. When major institutions stop talking publicly about exploring blockchain solutions and simply stop talking altogether, it usually means decisions have already been made. Silence isn't disinterest. It's focus. Stellar showing up quietly in systems without press releases is one of the strongest indicators insiders look for. Another confirmation comes from integration behavior. Institutions don't integrate casually. They commit resources, developers, compliance teams, time. When integrations deepen rather than reset, it signals long-term intent. Insiders say Stellar integrations are no longer being framed as pilots. They're being framed as components. There's also regulatory posture. When regulators shift from questioning whether a network should exist to defining how it can be used safely, that's a turning point. Stellar's transparency and design make it easier for regulators to engage constructively. That engagement reduces uncertainty, and reduced uncertainty accelerates adoption. Insiders also watch how often Stellar appears alongside legacy systems rather than being positioned against them. When a network is described as complementary instead of disruptive, adoption becomes easier. Institutions prefer evolution over revolution. Stellar fits that mindset cleanly. Another subtle signal is internal education. When institutions begin training staff on how a network works, that's not speculative. That's preparation. Training doesn't happen unless usage is expected. Insiders say Stellar is increasingly appearing in these internal learning environments, which signals long-term planning. The most overlooked signal is reliability under stress. Every system gets tested eventually. Payment surges, network congestion, unexpected demand. Stellar's ability to handle these moments without incident builds trust quietly. Trust compounds faster than hype ever could. This leads to an important realization. Stellar isn't trying to convince anyone anymore. It's simply showing up and doing the work. That shift from persuasion to performance is what insiders recognize as maturity. Markets often lag behind this phase because it doesn't create dramatic stories. There are no countdowns, no promises, just systems working. And working systems eventually demand revaluation, whether markets are ready or not. Another factor insiders consider is substitution risk. Institutions ask a simple question. If this network disappeared tomorrow, what would break? The more things would break, the more embedded the network has become. Stellar's growing presence in remittance flows and aid distribution increases that dependency quietly. There's also the network effect. As more participants integrate Stellar, it becomes more valuable for others to join. Not because of speculation, but because interoperability improves. That feedback loop is slow at first, then accelerates rapidly once a critical mass is reached. Insiders believe Stellar is approaching that inflection point. Not because of any single announcement, but because many small signals are aligning. Usage consistency, institutional behavior, regulatory comfort, operational reliability. This is where perception changes. Networks stop being discussed as crypto projects and start being discussed as infrastructure. That language shift matters more than any headline. If you're waiting for a moment where everything suddenly makes sense to the broader market, you may miss it. Infrastructure transitions are obvious only in hindsight. They feel boring while they're happening. That's why insiders stay patient. They understand that once Stellar crosses this threshold, the conversation won't be about potential anymore. It will be about impact. In the final section, we'll talk about what this means for you. Not predictions, not promises, but how to think clearly when a network is transitioning from possibility to necessity, and why that mindset matters more than any price target. Because when a system becomes necessary, it changes the rules quietly and then all at once. At this point, the most important thing to remember is that infrastructure doesn't announce itself. It settles in. It becomes part of how things work. And by the time everyone notices, the transition has already happened. That's the stage Stellar is approaching now. What makes this moment different isn't excitement. It's certainty. Not the loud kind that shows up in price predictions, but the quiet kind that shows up in behavior. Systems are being built with Stellar in mind. Processes are being designed around it. That's what it means when a network stops being optional. If Stellar crosses this threshold fully, XLM's role changes. It stops being viewed as a speculative asset and starts being understood as a utility token that supports real activity. That shift doesn't guarantee price outcomes, but it does change the rules. Demand becomes functional, usage becomes sticky, and those dynamics tend to persist regardless of market cycles. This is why chasing short-term price moves often leads to frustration. Infrastructure value doesn't reveal itself on a daily chart. It reveals itself through adoption curves, reliability under stress, and long-term relevance. Stellar has been quietly optimizing for those metrics for years. So the question becomes one of mindset. Are you reacting to noise? Or are you observing systems? Are you focused on what's trending? Or on what's being built? Because the latter is where real shifts usually start. If you've ever felt like XLM moves differently than other assets, this is why. It was never designed to entertain markets. It was designed to serve them. And service tends to be invisible until it becomes indispensable. Now here's what I want you to do. If this breakdown helped you understand what Stellar is really about to hit, tap the like button. It helps push thoughtful, long-term conversations into a space dominated by short-term hype. Subscribe to the channel if you want more deep dives like this, where we focus on infrastructure, adoption, and what institutions are actually doing behind the scenes. And drop a comment below. Do you think Stellar's biggest impact will come from remittances, cross-border payments, or something else entirely? I read every comment, and your perspective helps guide what we cover next. Because when Stellar's role becomes obvious to the wider market, it won't feel sudden to those who paid attention early. It will feel like confirmation, and the people who understand why it happened will be the ones best prepared for what comes next.